Media Training Primer. A brief peek into our media training and crisis communication program.
Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States of America, once said, "What kills a skunk is the publicity it gives itself."
Lincoln gave a hint to what publicity is and is not. Good publicity would bring our brands and businesses a good reputation, and the reputation would endear our brands and businesses to more communities and people. Who is the media? When we think about the media, traditionally we would think of newspapers, magazines, television, radio, and journals. Along the evolution of media through the internet, we began to have forums, blogs, social media, podcasts, video blogs or vlogs, and now, even dark social such as messaging apps. All these are media, and we as brands and businesses need to find ways to communicate effectively to all or many media channels as we can, to reach as many people as we can. Public relations and advertising. To some who may not know what public relations is, here is a short introduction. Public relations, or PR, is earned media where third parties say good things about your brands and businesses, without you having to pay them for it. This contrasts with advertising, which is paid media, where you pay a media to say exactly what you want to be said about your brands and businesses. Advertising is basically you touting yourself, while public relations is having unrelated people saying how good you are. Big difference. Public relations is about building reputation and trust in the community for the long haul. Public relations is about facts and the truth, even in, or especially in, a crisis. So, in a nutshell, never imagine you can tell journalists from a media to say what you want them to say. If you want to say exactly what you want to be said, pay advertising dollars and advertise. I hope that clears up the basic misconception about public relations.
One of the notable British Prime Ministers, Lord Palmerston, famously said to his colleagues in the House of Commons, in March 1, 1848, "We have no eternal allies, and we have no perpetual enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual, and those interests it is our duty to follow."
This is the tenet of how we should approach publicity: to make no enemies, to understand that relationships can be fleeting, and to focus on the business goals and community interests. Media Training Primer. This is our media training and crisis communication program that we have honed and delivered very successfully to all our clients through more than 30 years in consulting. We have trained startups, tech companies, industrial and manufacturing businesses, healthcare-related businesses such as hospitals and products, fast-moving consumer goods companies in fashion, audiovisual equipment, hospitality, nonprofits, and many more. We have several versions of this training program for the C-suite executives and business leaders. We have a full media training program that covers all kinds of media, with crisis communication components, and a simulated television interview and critique at the end of the program. We have a shorter version without the crisis communication component, with or without the simulated television interview and critique. We have a much shorter version just for broadcast and online audio-video interviews, without the crisis communication component. The whole training program is customizable depending on the client, if they desire extra consulting and customization. We will normally talk through the evolution of the media landscape in the Asia-Pacific and how that relates to the global media and political scene. We examine the importance of respecting the agenda of the media in serving their stakeholders, who are the audiences and readers, who in turn can be our prospects and customers. We cover the fundamental questions journalists will always ask and how to prepare for interviews, whether that be for print, broadcast, or online. For each type of media, whether print, broadcast, or online, what should we as spokespersons prepare for and provide them? We also run through the dynamics and essentials of media interviews. For rapid response and news jacks, how should we as spokespersons be prepared for? How do we communicate and relate well with journalists? And if there are difficult questions or questions we wish to avoid, how should we deal with them? What is a simple and effective way of telling compelling stories? How can we adopt simple aviation leadership and crisis management principles in handling media crises? And we end with a simulated television interview with critique. Media landscape and the world. Spanning 49 countries, with nearly 4.8 billion people, more than half of the world's population, the Asia-Pacific is the fastest-growing economy in the world. From 27% of the world's GDP in year 2000, the Asia-Pacific has grown to 37% of the world's GDP in year 2021, and would rise to more than 40% by the year 2040, according to S&P Global, holding the lion's share in the world then. The region is diverse, with diverse cultures, faiths, laws, and more than 2,300 languages and dialects, with at least 15 commonly used languages. This is why public relations in the Asia-Pacific is far more complex and sophisticated compared to the Americas or Europe. What has happened in the recent years in the Asia-Pacific in terms of the media landscape? How has global and regional politics affected news and media? How can businesses work well with the media's agenda and getting in the news? What shapes perception? What are the fundamental questions, the basics of 5W and 1H, when it comes to answering the basic media questions? And what is the network of allies strategy we advocate for our clients? Interview preparation. What should spokespersons prepare for when it is a print interview with newspapers, magazines, and journals? How should spokespersons prepare for online media interviews? What about broadcast media interviews at television and radio stations? What about video interviews with online video media? And how should spokespersons prepare for media interviews at seminars, conferences, or exhibitions? What to say and provide in interviews? Who is a spokesperson? What are official and unofficial spokespersons? How should businesses close the communication loop with the media when it comes to interviews? What about off-the-record questions by the media? Should you have scripts when you go for media interviews at all? Should you sell or hawk your wares in media interviews? If not, how should you approach this with finesse and subtlety? Interview dynamics and essentials. The primary goal for a media interview is for spokespersons to convey business and brand messages through the media to the public. If so, the message is the key, and all else are distractions. What then are effective zero-distraction tactics to achieve this? What are some of the interview basics when it comes to television, radio, Zoom or Teams, and other online video interviews? What is subtext, and why our posture, gestures, and demeanor matter in media interviews? What are some production caveats when we frame ourselves on screen for video and television interviews? And what are our 6 recommendations to engage with the media? The tango. Media interviews with journalists can be daunting for spokespersons. And yet, there are ways to sail through interviews after some practice and knowledge. How should spokespersons take control of media interviews, achieve on-screen or on-air credibility? How should spokespersons deal with small spoken errors? And should spokespersons avoid some questions? Difficult questions. There will be professional and friendly journalists who can help spokespersons feel comfortable and be at peace throughout nerve-wracking interviews. But there may be some journalists who may appear more assertive in interviews. How should spokespersons deal with tough questions? And if there are media interviews that may not sit well with businesses, how should spokespersons turn down such interviews? What happens when spokespersons are confronted with ambush interviews, at trade events for example? Successful storytelling. For most television interviews, they are fleeting and spokespersons breeze out of studios in minutes. However, radio and other online audio and video interviews may be lengthier and there are sufficient time to tell good brand and business stories. How then can spokespersons develop good stories that engage audiences with time-proven storytelling concepts? Media crises. For many businesses, they will not face a crisis that demands massive collaboration internally and externally to deal with such a crisis. But as a crisis goes, they are unpredictable and unscheduled for. They just happen. And these days, with every business running on the internet and the cloud, the rise of cybersecurity and data breaches are beginning to look more like a matter of when rather than if. If so, how should businesses preemptively deal with such crises? CRM and crises. When it comes to crises and the eventual need for crisis communication, we can learn and adapt from the most crisis-ready industry in the world, aviation. In aviation, pilots use CRM or crew resource management, which are time and field proven to deal with all manners of analyses, situations, teamwork, and crises. We go through brief principles of aviation CRM and how to deal with 3 types of threats, a discussion of ethics and compliance, and the basic steps of crisis communication. Simulated television interview. Although spokespersons go through many forms of media interviews, from print, online, broadcast, and video, the television interview is perhaps the most iconic as it is demanding and requires succinct and effective communication in minutes. We usually run through some simulation questions with our clients' spokespersons, and then put them through a simulated television interview with video recording, and then provide critique for their simulated interviews.
Benjamin Franklin, inventor and diplomat, once said, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail."
As with any leadership role, media interviews too need preparation to succeed. We aim to equip our clients' spokespersons with all the basics to allow them to rehearse and be ready for any and all media interviews whenever such opportunities arise. For more information on our public relations, digital marketing, business strategy, leadership training, media training, and crisis communication services, visit our website.